As investigators and journalists move deeper into the newly released material, the scale of Jeffrey Epstein's network becomes increasingly impossible to minimize or dismiss as coincidence. What emerges is not the portrait of a disgraced financier clinging to relevance, but of a man who spent years methodically cataloging reputations, alliances, and moments of vulnerability. Epstein appears to have treated power like a living organism, something that could be studied, predicted, and manipulated if one understood its instincts. His correspondence reflects an obsessive attention to who was rising, who was exposed, and who remained protected even when scandal brushed dangerously close. As we laid out in the previous part, this story is not just about one man's crimes, but about how power circulates quietly through networks of influence, shaping silence, protection, and delayed accountability long after the public believes the chapter has closed. Welcome to Political Plot, where we cut through the noise to reveal the power plays shaping American politics. Throughout the documents, Epstein repeatedly comments on individuals orbiting Donald Trump, including political advisors, donors, media figures, and foreign dignitaries. He often frames seemingly harmless public encounters as moments loaded with hidden meaning. A photograph, a handshake, a shared event, these are not neutral to Epstein. They are signals. He treats them as data points that reveal alliances and vulnerabilities long before the public understands their significance. This habit suggests that Epstein viewed public life as a theater where the real drama unfolded quietly backstage. One of the most revealing threads involves Prince Andrew, whose association with Epstein ultimately led to one of the most visible institutional collapses connected to the scandal. Epstein's messages portray him not as a distant acquaintance, but as someone deeply involved in shaping the response. He discusses damage control strategies, public relations outreach, and the importance of reframing allegations before they harden into accepted truth. In these communications, accusers are not treated as individuals with grievances, but as problems to be managed. Epstein emphasizes repeatedly that credibility must be attacked early before sympathy takes root. This approach mirrors a familiar pattern in elite scandals. Reputation is defended first. Moral reckoning is postponed indefinitely. Epstein appears to understand this pattern intimately. He speaks with confidence about the idea that allegations can be diluted through repetition, doubt, and strategic distraction. He references journalists by name, evaluates their tendencies, and proposes narrative angles designed to redirect scrutiny. In doing so, he reveals a deep understanding of how information flows and how fear of reputational damage can paralyze institutions that should otherwise investigate. Coordination with Ghislaine Maxwell continues even as public scrutiny intensifies. Their correspondence reads less like personal communication and more like internal crisis management memoranda. They outline talking points, categorical denials, and distancing strategies with clinical precision. What is most disturbing is the emotional tone. The severity of the allegations rarely appears to disrupt their operational mindset. There is no visible panic. Control remains the priority. This detachment illustrates how prolonged proximity to power can normalize even the most extreme behavior. Beyond politics, the documents show that Epstein's influence extended deep into cultural, academic, and intellectual spaces. He communicates with scientists, artists, philanthropists, and prominent thinkers, sometimes casually and sometimes with implied strategic intent. Invitations to conferences, suggestions of collaboration, and introductions to elite circles appear repeatedly. This challenges the notion that Epstein was isolated after his conviction. Instead, the correspondence suggests that he believed exclusion was temporary and that relevance could always be reestablished through the right relationships. This belief is central to understanding how Epstein operated. He did not see himself as someone permanently cast out. He saw himself as someone temporarily inconvenienced. His emails reflect a confidence that power systems are less moral than pragmatic, and that usefulness eventually outweighs disgrace. That belief, whether accurate or delusional, helps explain why he continued to invest so much energy in maintaining connections even as scrutiny mounted. When the focus returns to Donald Trump, Epstein's language oscillates between disdain and fascination. He mocks Trump's intelligence and impulse control, while simultaneously acknowledging that Trump's apparent shamelessness functioned as a form of insulation. In one exchange, a journalist notes that voters might not care about behavior that would end other political careers. Epstein appears to agree. He seems to view Trump as uniquely resistant to scandal, someone whose disregard for norms paradoxically strengthened his political position. This recognition suggests that Epstein understood how certain personalities thrive in environments where outrage becomes noise rather than consequence. At several points, Epstein hints that he possesses information capable of causing serious damage. These suggestions are never substantiated within the documents themselves, leaving open the possibility that they were exaggerated or manipulative, but the belief itself is revealing. Epstein clearly saw himself as someone holding leverage, someone who believed he had cards powerful enough to intimidate even a president. This perception speaks to how distorted his sense of power had become after years of operating without meaningful accountability. The political consequences of these revelations have been swift and complex. Calls for full transparency now cut across party lines, yet resistance remains deeply entrenched. Concerns about privacy, precedent, and executive authority complicate every step forward. Even if legislation mandating disclosure passes one chamber, it must survive the Senate and receive executive approval. This ensures that the process will be slow, contested, and subject to intense political pressure. What adds profound gravity to this moment is the visible presence of survivors throughout these proceedings. Their attendance reframes the entire debate. For them, transparency is not a partisan weapon or political tactic. It is a prerequisite for justice that has been delayed for decades. Their presence exposes the human cost of institutional hesitation and calculated silence, reminding observers that every delayed disclosure represents real harm prolonged. The White House continues to characterize the controversy as a distraction, accusing critics of selective leaks and narrative manipulation. That framing resonates with some supporters, but it fails to address the deeper structural unease revealed by the documents. The issue is no longer whether Epstein associated with powerful people. That has been established beyond dispute. The real question is how those relationships shaped silence, protection, and delayed accountability across multiple institutions. As the vote approaches and scrutiny intensifies, the investigation continues to expand. Each new disclosure reinforces the sense that Epstein operated simultaneously as predator and broker, exploiting systems that reward discretion and punish exposure. His emails reveal a man who believed proximity to power could outlast scandal, a belief that may explain how abuse persisted for so long without meaningful interruption. These documents do not offer closure. They expose recurring patterns of behavior, institutional reflexes, and psychological rationalizations that demand deeper examination. They illustrate how power insulates itself, how accountability is deferred, and how justice often arrives only when pressure becomes overwhelming. Whether the full truth ultimately emerges remains uncertain, but one reality is now impossible to ignore. This story is no longer just about Jeffrey Epstein. It is about the systems that enabled him, sustained him, and protected him. The remaining files may yet reshape the narrative again, and history suggests that once documentation enters the public record, silence becomes harder to justify, harder to defend, and eventually impossible to maintain.